So the startup ecosystem has always been a very important driver for Digital Wildcatters. The genesis of Digital Wildcatters was the Oil and Gas Startups podcast. We've always been very passionate about startups and the founders in the space, and one of the most critical components of a startup ecosystem is having the right investors and advisors in the space to help startups come up and build solutions. So I had my good friends Diana Grauer at Techneep FMC and Ryan Gurney at Montrose Lane come in and talk about what the capital space looks like in Houston and across the entire energy startup space, and as well as some of the things that they're excited to see in the future.
I'm Diana Grauer, Director of R&D for Techneep FMC.
Ryan Gurney, Montrose Lane, formerly known as Cottonwood Venture Partners.
I want to talk today about something that really is at the center of Digital Wildcatters. You know, Digital Wildcatters was built off of energy tech startups, and what we've seen in the last year and a half with COVID and just with the downfall of oil, with the pricing wars, it's been a really tough space for oil and gas tech. And then you come into 2021, what we're seeing on the other side with climate tech and everything that's happening in the SPAC space, it's almost the complete opposite story. So you have these really stark contrasts between oil and gas tech and climate tech. And there's a lot of, I get a lot of feedback from startups and questions wanting to know, what does the future of oil and gas technology look like? So I wanted you guys to come in here and talk to me a bit about that. Ryan, you guys have a great portfolio of energy tech companies. Are they all oil and gas specific, or do they go across different energy verticals?
Yeah, primarily oil and gas as it relates to customer base. That said, we apply to other industries as well, whether it be other forms of energy or other just heavy industry broadly.
Yeah, and then Diana, very involved in the space. I think probably the smartest person I know personally on robotics. You've been involved with deals like helping Houston Mechatronics get put together, which if you guys haven't seen Houston Mechatronics, it's one of the coolest things I've seen. It's one of the coolest things I've seen. So what are some of the things that you're seeing in the space for oil and gas technology? Are things picking up for you guys in terms of companies that are being funded, companies that are popping up? Are people getting laid off from oil and gas companies and kind of, seeing that this is the time that they can go out there and start their own thing? Why don't you guys start giving me some feedback on what you're seeing in the space personally?
Yeah.
So I have actually quite a few friends who have lost their roles in oil and gas companies, or at least in the larger conglomerates. And a lot of them are looking at startups. A lot of them have the ideas. They have really great technology that they've been exposed to through the oil and gas space, and they're all looking at building their startups. I think this is a great time for startups in oil and gas tech.
I agree. With the baseline being that oil and gas isn't going anywhere, I think it's a great time to be in it. Look, oil and gas has just been easy to hate over the past, let's just say 5 years or so. It's been incredibly volatile. You've had, the carbon criticism, et cetera. And then look, negative crude prices last year. Avoid that industry like the plague, right? That's just scary, and it's not for the faint of heart. But what happened kind of throughout all that? Well, what happened is negative oil prices was a catalyst to reduce headcount. It's unfortunate, but it is what it is. Okay, it also resulted in less investment and now less supply on the market. Demand's coming back. We see $65 crude. We have a healthier oil and gas market right now. But in the back of everybody's mind is, well, geez, I'm getting pressured from the public markets to generate cash flow, and I don't want to add a bunch of headcount if I don't have to. So what does that mean? It means that you need to enable automation, and I firmly believe, and clearly biased, that automation will be enabled with digital tech. So I think, look, we're all scarred from the past 18 months or so in particular, but look, it's just been a wacky time. But I think it's actually, set up the market to be fantastic for energy broadly, oil and gas tech specifically.
Yeah, from a contrarian viewpoint, there's so much opportunity out there right now, right? I've talked to VCs on the coast and like, why would we want to invest in a business that is dying? And it's easy to have that sentiment when you look at, the past 18 months, that it does seem like things that are dying and the sky is falling. But I think that opens up a lot of opportunity. I think some of the best startups are built at the bottom of cycles, right? And, for you guys, when I look at the difference between you, Ryan, and Diana, you're really more kind of software and digital focused. Diana's like deep tech, robotics, automation, things that are very capital intensive. And one thing that oil and gas tech has always struggled with has been the lack of early stage capital for these types of companies. I mean, before, Cottonwood was conceptualized back in the day, there weren't a lot of groups that were just focusing on energy tech, right? And I think that all three of us probably get a ton of questions from outsiders about the Houston ecosystem and the energy tech ecosystem as a whole. Like, what does it actually look like here if you want to start a startup? If you want to come to Houston and you want to start an oil and gas tech startup, what does the scene look like for investors, customers? Do you guys think that there will be, Diana, you come more from the CVC world, making investments from Technip and Schlumberger and some of the big corporates. Are corporations still willing to put money into big deep tech projects, like subsea, if it's like Houston Megatronics or those types? Is that something that you think is going to happen over the next couple of years?
Yeah, I think so. I think, first and foremost, cash is king. We've got to be generating cash flow. We can't survive if we're not. But beyond that, we are looking at some really, really big projects. So, for example, Technip FMC has invested in a program called Deep Purple, which is subsea hydrogen storage. Technip FMC, I don't want to sound too salesy, but we're investing in technology around clean tech as well. That really dovetails into an opportunity to invest in big tech solutions for oil field services. And I do think we're going to see some really good investments. We've got a really good team at Technip FMC that's taken over the VC practice. And I think we're seeing really good investments from R&D, selfishly because I run R&D, but also from the VC group and from our BD groups as well. So.
Yeah, and what about you, Ryan? On the software side, this has always been kind of a push-pull situation for startups, especially in this space, because you see the startups out in Silicon Valley, there's plenty of capital, high valuations, and you come over to the energy space, there hasn't been a lot of capital. You have more reasonable valuations that aren't just sky high that don't make any sense. Do you think that there'll be more players coming into the space in terms of investors that are looking at oil and gas tech?
Yeah, I mean, I think we've seen it a bit. I think there's two things as it relates to the institutional investor community as it relates to energy tech. There is, if there are huge winners, money will follow, right? And I think we're seeing that. I think we're seeing the early innings of some. But I think what we've also begun to see is a huge winner is probably, at least today, going to be reliant on some relevance to other industries. That's where software really shines, though, because I can have a field optimization software that's relevant to other field operations, not just oil and gas. And I think that's where you're going to see some of the bigger exits, where it's multi-industry. I think that will then just further bring capital into the space with those winners as well.
Yeah.
But look, from an institutional investor perspective, as we look at like our investor base, the endowments, the foundations, et cetera, they get pressure around oil and gas. So you've got to just find some other applications as well to attract those dollars.
Yeah, I think, I have coastal VCs reach out to me, and they're a bit larger funds. And the number one question VCs always ask me is, who's the billion-dollar company coming up in oil and gas tech? I'm like, that's such a VC question to ask me. Like, you should pay me if I tell you who the billion-dollar company is coming up. But it does lend to a good question: is are there billion-dollar exit opportunities for energy tech companies? What are y'all's thoughts on that?
Oh, absolutely. We see, I can think of potentially four that could happen in the next 5 to 10 years. But again, I'm invested in and looking for hard tech solutions, things that have a really, really long cycle time. So Ryan can do things quite a bit faster, and he sees things that would have faster exits than what an oil field services group would see.
Yeah, I agree with that. I mean, look, there are some billion-dollar valuations out there for a number of energy tech companies. So I think it's out there, and I think we'll continue to see it as well.
Yeah, and I think once you get those exits, that's what really starts building up the tech ecosystem. Once you have liquidity waterfalls, and several millionaires are made from those exits, and they can start reinvesting into startups as well. So I think it's important for the tech ecosystem to get to that point where they start having some liquidity events and really start bolstering it up. And so if you were someone that was looking to start a startup, Diana, let's talk about some of this deep tech, because this is capital intensive stuff, right? If we're talking about building automated ROVs like Houston Mechatronics, where you have unmanned robots going under the ocean, this stuff requires a lot of capital, right? So what resources are out there for people who are looking to pursue that, and how do they actually go about working with CVCs to get the resources they need to build this stuff out?
So there are quite a few resources within the CVCs. Most of the larger CVCs have their own accelerator incubator type of program, like Barbara Berger and Chevron Technology Ventures. They have a really, really good program for incoming startups. There are other sort of environmental support groups within the Houston area, like, for example, the Cannon, right next door to us right now, station, which is now the Ion. There's lots of different pieces and parts moving within the ecosystem. But I think you're right. I think we do need probably those $1 or $2 billion exits that really push us over the edge as a tech community.
That's what gets the FOMO going, right?
That's
Once
what-
the $1 billion exits come in, all the capital comes into the space at that point.
All the capital comes in. Yes.
Yeah, and look, if I was starting a hardware tech company today, I agree. I think Diana's group and similar groups, that's where you go. You need a big balance sheet, and you need some patience and some doors that can be open as well. If you're starting on the software side, really candidly, there is not a great seed ecosystem for energy tech software. And what I mean is there's not like 1 or 2 or 3 go-to spots. What ends up happening is wealthy individuals, former entrepreneurs, family offices, whatever, end up being that early stage capital. Why is that? The way I've distilled it, at least, is let's say you're a broad software seed shop, or let's just say you're an energy tech seed shop. You have to take a lot of shots on goal, right? So you'd be basically investing in every single company out there, just given that if you're industry focused, it's hard to have an industry focused seed fund. So then it relies on a broad seed fund. Then the broad seed funds often say, oil and gas, we'll sit this one out. So it's frustrating for the entrepreneur. I get it. I wish there was a go-to spot, because it'd make our lives a lot easier as well.
Absolutely.
But look, if I had any advice for anybody, you just got to kind of hustle. You got to find folks in your network that believe in you, and you got to not make a lot of money for the first couple of years and bootstrap it.
Yeah.
But that'll resonate. You'll ultimately have more equity on the back end.
Yeah, if we talk about the evolution of capital in the space, I mentioned that there wasn't a lot until Cottonwood came along back in the day. And even at that, you guys are Series A, and I think you do follow-on rounds, probably up to Series B. But that early stage seed money is still extremely hard to find in this space. And like you said, it usually comes from your direct network, high net worth individuals, and a lot of people just don't have access to that. And so it's definitely something that's needed in this space. Do you guys, and Ryan, this may be a good question for you with some of the capital raise that you guys have done with your funds. What do individuals think of the energy tech space? Like, is there a big pool of people that are interested in investing in it if they have the right opportunity, or is it you're kind of chasing unicorns there?
No, I think there's a pretty good, because look, everybody likes it, right? Like tech's a fun thing to invest in. Startups are a fun thing to invest in. So like, I mean, it plays well at the cocktail party, right? It's like, I mean, people want that. It's just a matter of kind of getting in front of those people at the right time. Look, it's also a matter of building trust, because for a seed, like you aren't investing in a company, you're investing in people. And how do you invest in people? It's like you've got to trust them. So anybody that's thinking about it, I just recommend to try to establish those relationships early, interface with them often, so then when the time comes, it's a natural conversation.
Absolutely.
Find an advisor, find a mentor, find someone. It doesn't matter if they come from the exact same background that you do, if they come from a VC background, it doesn't matter. Find an advisor so that you can bounce ideas off them, so that you can make changes to your tech and your approach based on their feedback. Find somebody.
Yeah.
Yeah, another route is talk to Series A investors like us and say, hey, I'm thinking about starting a company. Who have you seen, as we get these various cap tables, who have you seen on the cap table that might be interested? And I think that's a pretty efficient route to go as well. But look, you still have that trust issue, and how do you establish that trust? And then it's just going to require time.
One question I want to ask you guys is what technology you're most excited about in the space. So I know for me, the technology I get most passionate about is, it sits at this intersection of oil and gas and climate tech. It's actually improving oil and gas operations over the next 5 or 10 years. I think that there's so much opportunity. And if you can go to an oil and gas company and say, hey, this is both economical for you, it'll save you money, and it'll improve your ESG score and be better for all stakeholders. I think that is such a massive opportunity over the next decade. And you'll see some technologies like Power Century's doing a demo on this, on Evolve, and they fit in this bucket. What are some things that you guys are excited to see? Diana, what's happening in the robotics and automation space? I know that there's just some really cool things that are, and I think Houston is actually kind of becoming a hotbed for that. It seems like maybe Boston is really, focal point for that. But I think Houston has all the technical talent to pull it off. And then we also have resources, from things that you've done over at Techneep and other companies as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I would say robots are my passion. Robots are super exciting to me. But I also get excited about valve designs. There's a couple of really novel valve designs out there that I think are going to get some good traction. There are some really novel actuation methods for those valves. I know this sounds incredibly boring.
That's what I was about to say. Like,
else.
There's nothing sexy about valve designs, right?
Designs.
But yeah.
No, but it could completely revolutionize. It's right at that intersection. If you're not using, and I don't want to get into a big dissertation on this, but you've got to move the valve somehow. You can either use process gas, you can use air, or you can use electrons. It doesn't really matter. There's some really, really cool stuff coming out in that space that keep you away from methane emissions. It's amazing.
So are these, these valves that we're talking about, are these on the surface of land projects? Because I know you deal with like a lot of subsurface valves as well.
They're subsea. Yeah, they're both. They're both. So we're seeing some really interesting actuation methods in subsea, which allow you to automate. Then you can apply your digital tools. We're just seeing a lot of really, really interesting designs. And I think some of this is coming back out of the layoffs that we've had in the industry. We've just got people who've been sort of released back into the wild, and they have the opportunity to think now.
Yeah.
And they are thinking. And it's an amazing time to look at their ideas.
They're tinkering in the garage, building
They're
things.
tinkering.
I love it. I love people that build things. What are you excited about, Ryan, from the digital and software components? Is there anything that gets you going?
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely less sexy than the robotics stuff. And it's perhaps a boring answer because I agree with you. I think the most compelling software or new applications, maybe not even a new application, is, well, stepping back, my baseline is the world will consume more and more energy, and the low-cost, environmentally friendly source of that energy wins, period. So how can you enable that? You're going to enable low-cost operations, and you're going to layer in transparency that proves, and you can say, this is where the hydrocarbon started, this is how we extracted it, transmitted it, and how it ends up in your gas tank. And that transparency, I think, is huge. So it's kind of this layer of like low-cost energy wins for everybody, yet a level of transparency that allows people to audit to say, I feel good about this responsibly sourced fuel.
I think that's a really interesting point, because we're seeing a lot of tech around detection methods for fluid flow. We're seeing a lot of tech around detection methods for emissions and leaks. There's a great company, Seacops, you know them well, out of Austin. Shout out to Ian Cooper.
Yeah.
They are doing some amazing things. And they aren't technologies that we would have even considered 5 years ago. Mm-hmm. Why would an oil field services company invest in emissions reduction technologies? Mm-hmm. I don't care. I'm going to sell you a wellhead and send you on your way.
Yeah.
What does that look like? But now we've got these ideas around integrated projects. We're reducing our own scope 1 and 2 emissions. There's some amazing innovations going on right now.
Yeah, I think the evolution that we've seen over the last several years, we made a video about this for Digital Wildcatters, that the oil and gas industry is investing heavily on emissions reductions. And just, whether it's Seacops or Microtech or any of these companies, there's a whole group of them that are looking at how can we reduce spills, methane emissions, and that technology is what really gets me excited, because I think that oil and gas, especially natural gas, I think is the transition fuel of the future. And I think that we can produce it and do it sustainably and do it in a way that's clean for the environment and socially responsible. So I definitely like technologies that sit at that intersection.
Yeah, totally agree.
So guys, thanks for coming on this. Really appreciate the insight. If anyone wants to start their journey and they're looking for capital, 2 people that I highly recommend talking to, especially if you're building robots, talk to Diana. If you're looking, do software, start building those relationships with the guys over at Montrose Lane. Really appreciate y'all coming on and doing this.
Thank you.
Thank you.
It's great.
Yep.
Thank you.